These are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Top D&O Claims for Community Associations webinar. I'm your host, Sherry Branson. I have a very special guest today, Rachel Plazak, Senior Claims Representative from Travelers Insurance. And Rachel joins me right now from Massachusetts. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good.
Good. And Rachel's on the East Coast. I'm in Texas, and Rachel is getting to be fall in New England. I know that, but I know it's a little bit warm out there, right? It's still summer-like.
My phone says it's about 80 degrees right now at 4 o'clock.
Okay, so it's kind of like July in September, in July.
Cool summer, and now we're getting a warm fall, so.
Oh, interesting.
You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting for apple season because this is the great time of year usually to get apples, you know. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you for offering your expertise and sharing it with us today. Rachel has been working with Travelers for quite a while, right, Rachel?
Yes, Travelers for about 15 years, and it's specifically with the D&O claims about 12 years now.
12 years. Okay, so you've seen lots of claims over the past 12 years.
I've seen a lot.
You've seen a lot. Exactly. That's wonderful. I did want to mention if anybody wants a copy of today's webinar, this PowerPoint presentation, I can email it to you. And my email address is sbranson@kdins.com. And I also put a recording of all of our webinars on our website, which is kdisonline.com. And you can listen to today's webinar again, or you can listen to all of our past webinars. We have everything from D&O, crime, umbrella, cyber, basically everything that we cover, every product that we have, we've done a webinar on. So we have quite a library there for you to check out. And today, Rachel, we are going to talk about we're going to cover several topics. The first one we're going to talk about is why do community associations need directors and officers liability? What is a claim? Who's an insured? The top D&O claims that you see and that we see at Kevin Davis. And then we're going to touch upon risk management to help people out with risk management issues. And people might wonder, why is there a rise in D&O claims? Why has it been more necessary for associations to have directors and officers liability? And why do they even need it? Well, basically, people and organizations are not immune from lawsuits, unfortunately. Community associations have limited resources to indemnify the directors and officers or to respond to litigation, settlements, damage awards, etc. And D&O liability protects directors and officers as well as the association from damages and defense costs resulting from allegations of wrongful conduct and lawsuits. So we're seeing lots of more and more litigation, etc. And now the definition of a claim, how do we define claim? Let's see, we have 6 descriptions of claims up on the screen right now. I'm not going to read off all 6. I'll read off the top 4, which is a claim is a written demand for monetary or non-monetary relief, the civil proceeding by service of a complaint, criminal proceeding by filing of charges, a formal administrative or regulatory proceeding commenced by a filing of a notice of charges, formal investigative order, service of summons, or similar document. So that's a mouthful. And then the last 2 there are very legal, lots of legal terminology in that. So if you'd like a copy of this presentation to keep it at your desk. And I did want to mention you can also share this with board members, board of directors, property managers. If they would like to see this, feel free to email it out to people. So if you want it, just let me know. So we just discussed what is a claim, and now we'll define who is an insured, and then we'll get into the top claims that Rachel is seeing that I'm seeing. Who is an insured? The insured organization is the association as an entity, any nonprofit subsidiary. Insured persons are past, present, duly elected or appointed officers, directors, trustees, employees, volunteers, committee members, spouses of insured persons, and the property manager. So that covers quite a range there. There's a lot of people under the category of insured. And now let's get to the top areas that we're seeing in claims, Rachel. I know, as you mentioned, you've been doing claims for 12 years. That's quite a while. And one that we're seeing at Kevin Davis is breach of fiduciary duty, which is a real broad category. Can you define that for everybody joining us today and give us an example?
Certainly. So when anybody is elected to the board, They're basically making an oath that they're going to make decisions that benefit the association. They're going to make the best decision for the association, not any one particular homeowner, and certainly not themselves. So it's broad because anytime they make a decision that is not in the best interest of the association, it can be called a breach of their fiduciary duty. So that can be a decision about a contract they enter into. Perhaps they go through the bidding process, and rather than taking the best bid that they receive, they decide to give the job to their uncle who has a landscaping company, and that would be a breach of fiduciary duty. It can be any question about the decisions that the board have made. If someone thinks that it's not in the best interest of the association.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes.
Fiduciary duty.
And as something similar to that, the example that I have on the screen right now is a board president bid on a foreclosed condo. The association had foreclosed on a condo, and he bid on it to buy it. And the rest of the board members and the association saw that as a conflict of interest, and he wasn't acting in the best interest of the association. So he was sued for breach of fiduciary duty. So these things happen all the time, and it's a very common claim, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly it's all about the decision making.
Yes, yes.
And that's what the board members do. They're put in place to make decisions for the association. So
day in and day out, absolutely, lots of decisions. And the next one, Rachel, is the violation of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, also known as the CC NRS, which are basically the bylaws of any association. They're the rules, the bylaws that the people have to live by. And there are so many, I know a lot of people, may read them in the beginning. Some people may never read them. They may never know what's in the bylaws or the CCNRs. What are you seeing in that area?
So the CCNRs basically set forth what all the rules are, like how the board will conduct noticing a meeting, holding an annual election. If any one of those things is done contrary to how it is said it's going to be in the CCNRs, that can be determined, that can be called a violation of the CCNRs. Perhaps they don't notice the meeting timely. They send out notice, 10 days before rather than 15 days before. That would be a violation. What we typically see are people who believe that there has been an improper election. So what they're looking for is to have the election that took place nullified, and then they demand that another election be held. And when you mention that there are claims that are non-monetary claims, there are claims that it's not necessarily litigation. It could come in as a demand letter that says, you didn't hold the meeting properly. You violated the CCNRs, and I demand that you hold another election and nullify the one that took place. That should be tendered as a claim.
Absolutely. And, as we talked about, these are homes, people live there, there are elections. There's lots of issues that come up in a homeowners association that are not related to money. So non-money claims are very common, and this would be an example of that.
Correct.
Absolutely. And we've seen a claim even relating to the one that I have on the screen. Each association usually has a list of approved colors in their CCNRs, and somebody may not pay attention to that list. And in this particular claim, they painted their house a color that was not approved. The association told them it's not approved, and the owners basically sued for arbitrary discriminatory treatment since they believe that other homes in the neighborhood were not on the approved color list, so they thought they were being discriminated against, which opens up a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly selective enforcement is what someone might call that, but usually that also sort of involves you're letting these people have it, and they're violating the CCNRs, and yet you won't let me, so. Yeah.
Playing favorites, that kind of a thing. Absolutely. Okay, so that's a very common claim. And then, Rachel, all of these associations are entering contracts with vendors every day, from painters to landscapers, to everybody under the sun. And these are legally binding contracts. And as a board member, I'm a volunteer. I just sign a contract with a vendor, and I don't really think much of it until that vendor may not be performing up to what we expect them to perform, or we're not happy with the vendor. So we decide we're just going to change vendors. So what would happen in that situation?
So that's not an easy process, canceling a contract. Typically, the contracts are drafted by the contractors, and the terms are going to be very favorable to the contractor. So, out of the gate, I think it's important to have the association's general counsel review the contract before it is signed to make sure that they're not entering into seriously unfavorable terms that's going to impede their ability to cancel the contract if they're not getting the service that they're paying for. Secondly, if there is the desire to cancel the contract, I think it's important to have general counsel review the contract to see what is required and to make sure that it is followed. That is, typically we either see breach of contract claims for improper termination or failure to pay. Failure to pay is a little more obvious, but and I would say an example of it would be we had some high-rises in Florida that had some elderly homeowners who the elevator contractor wasn't keeping the elevators in good working condition. They were constantly breaking down, and people were unable to get to their homes. So the board, trying to do its best for the people who were living in this, this community, terminated the contract and got another contractor in there so that they could have working elevators. They were trying to fulfill their fiduciary duty, and they ended up with a breach of contract complaint for improper termination. Mm. So, when you say, like, why should people have to, insurance, like I said, you're constantly making decisions, and sometimes you're making the right decision for your community, but it might not be done in a way that prevents litigation. So you want to just be very careful.
Sure. When in doubt, speak to counsel or get advised. And the other issue that popped into my mind when you were talking about that situation is there's a lot of turnover with board members and boards. So that one board might have signed those contracts with the elevator company and the landscaper, et cetera, but then the new board comes in and they're not familiar with the contracts. And they just, they just decide to end one and arbitrarily. And so
it's not uncommon for the board to come in and clean house.
Yes.
They don't like anything done, so they're going to hire all new people.
Right, exactly. And we've seen a claim too with a landscaping company where after the first year of the contract, the board said, well, we don't like the plants that they're planting or the design that they're doing, so we need a new landscaper. So let's just get rid of this landscaper, and we found a new one, and they ended up getting sued for lack of fulfillment of the contract. So it happens all the time. So when in doubt, there's a big responsibility on the shoulder of the board of directors, and they really need to check everything out before they make these decisions just off the top of their heads. And Rachel, another area that we're seeing quite a bit of, and there's employees at associations, they have employees, they have all kinds of situations going on. Like we talked earlier about homeowners, maybe with paint colors on houses. Discrimination is an area that's quite a big area, and there's a lot of facets to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. So typically it's either going to be a housing discrimination or employment discrimination. There's several administrative agencies in place where people can go and file complaints, without an attorney. I think relatively cheap. It might even be free. And with housing, it's typically, you're discriminating against me. Service animals, a big one. Swimming pools is another one. Where, the board is they're trying to protect people who are going to use the pool. And sometimes they'll have restrictions, like if you wear a diaper, you can't use the pool. If you don't have a driver's license, you can't get a pool pass, things like that, which they might be doing in the best interest of, we want to make sure everyone knows how to swim. We want to make sure people aren't, peeing in the pool, pooping in the pool. But those unfortunately, those have sort of come back against the association. Anytime I have seen the restriction of the common element pool, it has not gone well for our association. So.
Interesting, very interesting. So you have to be extremely careful when it comes to the common areas, the rules that you just decide make sense to you, but they may not make sense from a legal standpoint.
Correct. Everybody needs to be able to access them. And that's actually something I should touch on is the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act. And if you have a association that allows people to do short-term rentals, that opens up the property to being ADA compliant. Whether anybody who lives in the property requires it. So that is sort of an area where we're seeing some serial litigants who just basically go around looking for pools without a pool lift, or bathroom without a handle or rail, and just filing complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint. So it's very important that the associations be cognizant of that requirement if they're going to allow people to do short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you're seeing more and more short-term rentals in the coastal communities, right, Rachel, like in Florida and North Carolina, et cetera, where some places are actually turned into condo hotels where they're the units are rented out. And the ADA is the American Disabilities Act, which requires access to public spaces and basically ramps. The pool has to have the lift, that kind of a thing. So, so that's a trend that you're seeing then. You're seeing more and more litigation in that area?
Yeah, we see that. And then with employment discrimination, typically it's someone filing an EEOC charge alleging that they've been terminated because, fill in the blank. They national origin, their religious affiliation, their sexual orientation, you name it. Mm-hmm. So, the board is sort of tasked with making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed when they're terminating people, so that when the investigator, the investigators for the EEOC, they're looking for discrimination. So they're, that's how their vision is sort of colored, if you will. So it's important to have documentation showing exactly why the decision was made, that was made.
Mm-hmm. So. Absolutely. And that leads us into employment practices liability, which falls into that category. And basically, as you were saying, board members, they're volunteers. They're not human resources professionals. They don't understand the pitfalls of hiring and firing and what could happen if they just decide to fire somebody without any documentation. Right, Rachel?
Correct. Certainly with the EPL claims, if the association is going to be hiring, they're going to have employees, it's sort of imperative that they have an employee handbook. And if they don't have one, they should get one. They should have an attorney who is familiar with employment law draft a handbook for them. The other thing I would strongly recommend is, as I mentioned before, document everything that happens. If someone's tardy, you make a note about it, you discuss it with them, you put it in the file. The EPL claims, the major one that stands out for me is I had a claim that involved two associations that shared a property manager, and they were looking for a new property manager, and they went through the interviewing process, and they came up with a candidate. The acting property manager called her and said, "Hey, we want to offer you the job." In that conversation, she said, "Oh, that's great. I just came from the doctor and learned I'm pregnant."
Oh.
And the property manager said, "Let me talk to the board and get back to you." And got back to her and said, "The board doesn't want to deal with that." And had a slam dunk EPL discrimination complaint. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
You can't just say no to somebody because they're pregnant. Yeah.
Maybe they were acting in the best interest of their association because they couldn't afford to pay for
maternity leave.
Go out on maternity leave, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they just don't realize. Great. Thank you. Yes, and we did have a situation too. We saw an age discrimination claim that came in where there was a beloved security guard. He was in his 70s. The neighbors loved him. He was well liked by everybody, but a new person had applied for the job, so they hired this younger person and fired the 72-year-old man, and ended up getting hit with a claim, Age Discrimination and Employment Act, ADEA. So there's age discrimination. I mean, there's really all different levels of it. So if you have employees, it's a good idea to be aware and have counsel advise you on any human resources issues. And like you said, to document. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great advice. Great advice. And if anybody has any questions, about these claims that we're going over, I did also want to mention that I have examples. I can send you the PowerPoint that we're covering right now, but I also have claims examples that I could send to you, additional claims, which you could also share with board members and share with the property manager, so they'll have an idea of, what potential claims are could be coming down the road if anything like this does occur. And there are other, of course, a lot of other claims to talk about today, but we're going to touch upon a few more. And insured versus insured, Rachel, that's a pretty big area. We see a lot of insured versus insured. What exactly is that?
Well, that can be when a board member goes rogue in the association. Other association board members file a complaint against the rogue board member. It can be when a new board is elected and they start reviewing what the old board did or did not do and file suit against them for breach of fiduciary duty or violation of CC NRS. I would say these are sort of some of our more expensive claims, because typically what ends up happening is there's a counterclaim filed, and if it's filed and it captures the defendants as board members, it triggers coverage on both sides. So that erodes the limit quickly. Yeah.
Okay. Claims back and forth, kind of firing back and forth at each other. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing with insured versus insured is it's very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Very emotional. People feel like their reputation is being tarnished where they live, and they don't want to admit any wrongdoing. They feel like everyone's going to know, So there's a lot of emotion that goes into it. They can be really tricky to settle.
Oh, absolutely. And they're living in the same neighborhood as these people, and they're seeing them. They're not planning to move. So once these start, it can create all kinds of different dynamics within the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. And now the next area that we see some claims in is mismanagement of association funds. Can you give an example of that?
I can. I actually have sort of an interesting claim that just came in. After 12 years, I can't say I've seen it all because I continuously see new stuff. Mismanagement of association funds typically involves the reserves. And the claim that I just received is a young couple who purchased a home. The people who are on the board and who live around them are substantially older. And the thought process is that their assessments are really low because the people who are not planning on being there too much longer don't want to fund the upkeep of the association in the future when they're not going to be there. So I have a claim where these, very fiscally responsible young homeowners are saying, you need to increase our assessments because we don't getting this huge assessment, when you guys aren't here anymore. So.
Yeah, interesting. That's really different. I don't think I've seen one of those. We want to pay more money.
We want to give you more money. Yes, exactly. But also, we want all of you to be paying more money. So that's
right.
Part of it.
That's really interesting. Wow. So it can go both ways. There can be claims regarding we're paying too much.
Typically go both ways. That's a first for me.
That's different. That's really unusual. Wow.
Yeah.
And then, Rachel, during the housing situation back in 2007, 2008, there were a lot of foreclosures going on. And I know associations have to be very careful when they're foreclosing on a unit. Now, what kind of hot water can they get into in that situation, like a wrongful foreclosure claim?
Right. So non-judicial foreclosure, I think, is the area that gets really tricky. And that's where the association can go through the non-judicial foreclosure process themselves. Typically, if they're going through a foreclosure process, they're not getting paid the assessments that they need. They may not have a lot of funds. So here's an avenue where they can, try to foreclose and recoup and get some of that money back. The issue with non-judicial foreclosures is it's really sort of specific as to what needs to happen. There are multiple steps that need to be followed in terms of mailing out and notice to people and notice to the public. It has to be published in a local paper. And if any one thing isn't done properly, if the letter is sent but it is sent to the wrong apartment, it can result in a wrongful foreclosure. And courts are they don't want to kick people out of their homes. So it becomes a very tricky litigation, because if it's to the point where the home has been sold at auction, typically for a lot less than what the home is worth, and you have the person who has lost their home and the person who has, sort of gotten this bargain of a lifetime, and they're both going to look to the association and say, you did the foreclosure improperly and you need to pay for it. You need to resolve it. And they both want the house. I mean, across the board, they always both want the house, which, physically can't happen. Sure. So it becomes very expensive. And that's one where it might not feel good to have to go to an attorney and try to get things done through an attorney, but that upfront cost can save a lot of time and a lot of money down the road.
Yeah, it's well worth the money in the beginning. And with it used to be all, as you mentioned, they started non-judicial foreclosures, which meant that now the burden falls on the association to do it right, where before, if it was done in the courtroom, well then of course it was done well and done correctly, because it's in a courtroom and it's judicial. So now the burden falls on the association, which is a big burden. And you don't want to shoulder that and end up getting sued by the person being foreclosed upon and the new homeowner and pay tons of money. So these, I'm sure they're expensive. And then the last category, which we've seen a lot of regarding hardwood floors in condo complexes where there's a high-rise condo, elevators, somebody living near an elevator shaft, noise complaints. That's an area that we've seen kind of growing over the past couple of years. What do you see there?
Yeah. Typically, I see those in New York. Every co-op is going to have documents that talk about the warranty of habitability and how everyone who lives there has the right to the warranty of habitability. And there's the board is then tasked with enforcing that. So if someone's violating it, it is up to the board to send the notifications and the fines and to try to correct it. But often what you have is sort of a neighbor versus neighbor dispute. I mean, we've seen them where people are just pissed at the person who lives downstairs, and they do put the speaker down on the floor and crank. We've seen it.
Oh, wow. So you can get really ugly then.
In the middle of it, because the person who's downstairs suffering from this noise is saying, you guys need to do something.
Right.
Well, sort of evicting the person, which is very tough to do.
Right.
There's...
Yeah, and you can't be in their house, in their condo, or in their house 24/7 listening for the noise. That would be, it's a hard thing to prove, right? I mean, yeah, they're walking heavily. Well, they walked for 10 minutes heavily, or you hear the hardwood floors, and then you don't hear it for a few hours. So, I mean, that would be a difficult thing to prove, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, in New York, they have their sound engineers who will come in and set up equipment. Oh. So it's kind of a science.
There's a sound science. Okay.
When it's a neighbor versus neighbor, again, it's emotions.
Yes.
It's running on emotions, and it's very difficult to settle any claim that is about emotions.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it just
A
keeps
lot.
on and on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Great. Well, thank you. And I wanted to mention that every insured who has a traveler's policy has access. This is a great resource and a great tool, Rachel, and she can tell us a little bit more about this, but there's a risk management helpline. If an insured has a traveler's policy, they can call and get 1 free hour of risk management advice from the law firm of Cole, Scott, and Kissane. And I know you can't ask policy questions, right, Rachel? But you can get advice regarding something that you think may be a claim or might turn into a claim, etc. So can you talk about this helpline a little
They
bit?
wouldn't tell you if something was a claim, because that's going back to the policy, but they can tell you what might turn into litigation.
Oh,
They
okay.
might, if you say you're thinking about terminating a contract, they can sort of walk you through like what you have and what you need to do to make sure
Okay.
that it's done properly.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a wonderful resource. I mean,
Yeah, and it's a number, and it's free. That's the best part. It's 1 hour free. The phone number is up on the screen, and it is in the policy as well. In the back of the traveler's policy, you'll see this phone number. So this is the risk management helpline. And I did want to mention that we also have a lot of risk management videos that we've done over the past 8 years or so, 8 to 10 years. We have them on D&O liability and all of our other products. So lots of risk management videos on our website, which is kdisonline.com. And you can also check out our webinar again on our website as well. And now we go to the claims hotline, which is a number that is also included in the policy. And that's where you would report a claim at this 1-800 number. And let's see. Now, Rachel, we do have a question that's come in from Nicolette from Connecticut. And Nicolette would like to know, which states are you seeing the most claims in?
that's heavily influenced by where we write a lot of policies. So, but having said that, I would say Florida, New York, Illinois, and Texas.
Okay, Florida, Illinois, and New York. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Rachel, in your experience, you've been doing claims now for 12 years. What's the largest claim that you've handled? How big?
I've had a policy limits claim that was $1 million. And that was an insured versus insured. It was a board member who got sued by the association, who then countersued. And there was a conflict that was created with the property manager. So we ended up having 4 law firms involved in that one piece of litigation.
Wow.
So, and unfortunately, it was this book of business's first policy ings claim.
Wow.
So,
and you were the lucky one that got it. Wow, $1 million claim. That's big. That's really big. When you got
actually, it wasn't done. It went to the excess carrier. So.
Oh, wow. It kept going up and up from there. That's a big one. That's one for the record books. Oh. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for your expertise. I really appreciate all the great information today. And did you want to add any tips or, advice to people regarding claims and what they should
One thing I wanted to add with the claims hotline, that's a great place where you can call in about a claim. But I would always make sure that you, to the extent that there are any board members out there or property managers watching this, make sure that the agent is aware of the claim, because sometimes it triggers other policies that you have or that the association has. And if it triggers a general liability policy, that's a policy that typically doesn't erode your limit. The defense costs do not erode your limit of liability. And also, there's typically isn't a retention, so you don't have to pay the retention up front, which under the D&O policy can range anywhere from $1,000, I think we have up to $50,000 dollars. So that's a savings. And secondly, I would strongly recommend that when people get on the board, or any board, have a centralized email that they utilize for all board communication. And the reason I recommend that is, should you end up in litigation and you're going through the discovery process and they say they want all of the emails related to the board's discussions about XYZ, if you're emailing people from your personal account has become discoverable. And I have seen it.
Have you seen something happen like that, Rachel?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It can be very embarrassing for the people involved. And so, we strongly recommend having a centralized email for the board, and that's what they use for all of their back and forth correspondence.
Sure.
And it can save the board a lot of hassle.
Absolutely. And it keeps it all in one location. If you have one email address for business that's handling association business, it's all there in one location, as opposed to 5 different board members' personal email accounts all over the place, going back and forth. So it's easier to track. And like you said, if you don't want your personal emails out there, then it's a great idea to do that. That's awesome advice. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Well, thank you for sharing your expertise today. It was fabulous information, and I hope everybody enjoyed today's webinar. Again, if you'd like a copy of the webinar, of the PowerPoint presentation, please send me an email to sbranson@kdins.com, and then our website is kdisonline.com. You can listen to today's webinar again and all of our past webinars, and please join us in October, on October 26th, as Kevin Davis is back, and we talk about cyber risk for community associations. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks so much, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.